Welcome to the Crew Collective webinar. I have Rich Robinson with me here today from Movement Leaders Collective and Creo. How about it, Rich?
How about it? Look at that. Well, there's something in that name. It's never going to catch on. Two of us.
That's right. Creo Collective, create together and create, build, design. So we're talking today about fractals. Rich, what's a fractal?
Yeah, well, in terms of catchy titles for webinars, this probably doesn't rank up there in the top 10 of it's going to wow people. Fractals are a mathematical term, and it was discovered by a mathematician called Benoit Mandelbrot, and he describes it as a way of seeing infinity, which I love, a way of seeing infinity. So he would describe it as a repeating pattern that displays at every scale. So it's basically an idea that is repeating, and it repeats across the whole of an organization or an organism. So if you imagine the idea of prayer, the meta idea, the big idea of prayer, a fractal is how prayer happens in the smallest unit all the way to the biggest unit. So it's not just the big does prayer meetings or every individual does personal prayer, but it's a pattern that repeats at scale, smallest to largest. And so what I want to do, and what Mike's asked me to do, is to really build out why fractals, because it's a technical term, it's a mathematical term, but the idea is that what we want to do is to unlock the movement potential, the movement dynamics within every believer within our system. So I don't know about you, but I've spent a lot of time chasing, managing, cajoling, trying to shift behavior, trying to get leaders to move, trying to shift a mindset or get people behaving. And what if we access the fractal pattern, it begins to be self-generating and self-replicating. So if we unlock the fractal pattern self-generating, so it's not Rich pushing it uphill, but it actually begins to repeat itself. It's not me with all my charisma and energy and effort making it happen, it begins to happen itself. So we get this sort of falling downhill or unfolding and multiplying. So you can see fractals everywhere. I've got a couple of images just to quickly bounce up and show you that. I hope you'll be able to just see the picture of what we're trying to do. So the first one comes up, you can see in this fern, this repeating pattern. So there's one circle that becomes a second circle that becomes a third circle, and you can see it again in this image as well. Similar shape in black and white, this sort of recurring pattern. And there's a beauty about fractals. There's something that it is seeing infinity. It just continues to go on and on and on. And so what does this mean for us as leaders? Well, I want to start with 3 stories. I know Mike loves stories, and anything that Mike influences and leads and serves will love stories. I'm nowhere near the grade A Premier League storyteller that Mike is, but I will just give you a little frame. And I want to tell you just 3 stories. So first one, we move into this neighborhood, and what we're looking for is, where's the pain? Where's the opportunity? What do people celebrate? What do they love? Where do they gather around? And what do they struggle with? And what's not right? And so in this community, with a whole heap of different beautiful and broken people, we found just this group of young people, street corner, doing what they shouldn't have been doing, but also kicking a football. And so fast forward 6 months later, we've built relationship, built trust, kicked the football on the street corner, begun to have some sense of semblance of a game, and it became a youth football club for the neighborhood that then actually became a youth football league where different micro churches began to connect. And so this street corner gang of young people became this soccer team where we were able, proper soccer, English soccer, note to self, not American football, not any of that, soccer, English soccer, soccer team. Second story, move into a different neighborhood. And we had this wonderful lady who worked in the corner shop during the day and then worked on the street during the night. And between finishing her shift on the shop and heading off to work on the street in the evening, she used to come via our house, knock on the door, come on in, put the kettle on, and then just sit and read. We had 3 little kids. We did the little Discovery Bible, sort of Jesus Bible book, and sort of looking and learning at the pictures. And she just used to sit for about 15, 20 minutes every night, like crosswork, like clockwork. This brilliant and beautiful, wonderful lady, chaotic life, but every day, same time, knock on the door, cup of tea, read the Bible with the kids, and then head off. And this became this sort of ritual. And then we talked, and coffee became cake. And if you know anything about Brits, we love to talk about the weather and love to eat cake. And so we started eating cake, and this got into the story of the fact that she not only loved cake, she loved bingo. And I have no idea if bingo translates to the States. So Mike, you can give me a nod, or it's you get your scorecard, there's numbers, you roll, shout out your number, and you're trying to get a house and a line. And what we discovered was that the various people in this community would spend their benefits, their government money, on a whole raft of different things, and they couldn't afford to go to the bingo house, but loved bingo. So fast forward 6 months, and we're running a bingo and cake evening for prostitutes, drug dealers, disaffected and excluded teenagers, just a ragtag bunch eating cake, playing bingo. Fast forward 6 months, and it's this wonderful community. Third story, the community we're in right now, praying, looking, listening. Our community has huge amounts of infidelity, broken homes, blended families. One of our 3 kids, he was one of only 3 children in his class of 27 that came from a home with 2 parents, and 2 parents that were married. And so that's not a judgment on anyone, but it's a reality of the disruption within our community. And so we felt this sense of, how do we love as a family? How do we invest in family? How do we serve family? And so we have an office at the local co-working space, and we're sat, and they know that I do strange Christian things with leaders and travel around the country and the world doing sort of leadership with churches and charities and things like that. And I said, do you do anything for family? And I always say, lead with a missional white lie, lead with a yes, which is yes, of course we do. And we don't do anything with families, but this just lead with a yes. I was like, yes, of course we do. And came home and told my wife that we had to design a parenting course for non-Christians that was going to launch in about 3 weeks. And she smiled, as she always does, and went there. It's like, yeah, of course we do. So we took our training that we do with leaders and disciple making, and we basically put it into 4 sessions. Know yourself, get the best out of your partner, create family, and then raise great kids. Really easy. And so fast forward 6 months, we've got 8 non-Christian couples gathering on a Sunday to talk about family and values and parenting, all those things. Why do I tell you these 3 stories? A family's course, bingo and cake, a football pitch, and a football club. Because that's an expression of a fractal. The training I had as a microchurch leader, one of our core values was listen to context. So listen to context. And so that idea, listen to context, became embodied in our practice. And so every time we went into a different context, we were listening to the context. The principle was listen to the context. The practice is to listen. And then the outcome is a contextualized practice. So the core principle is listen to context, and the contextualized practice comes out of listening to the mission field. So we're not thinking about a vehicle or a structure or a strategy. I don't say to every microchurch leader, the vehicle you need to use to plant a microchurch is bingo and cake. Works every time. I don't just say, go play soccer every time. We're not going with a formulaic solution and vehicle. The practice is listen to context. And the fractal, the repeating pattern is, I am always listening to context. And so whatever comes out the other side, it's not formulaic strategy and structure. It's the expression, the contextualized expression. So I want to just draw and give you this picture of a fractal. So if we understand a fractal as a simple and scalable practice. So it takes an idea and it embeds it, it repeats it, and it scales. So it embeds, it makes it real, it then repeats, so it makes it happen more than once. It's not a one-shot deal, and then it scales. It actually goes from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16. And so what we're looking for is whatever your core values or your big ideas, whatever you have as a concept or whatever you have as your word, the word becomes flesh, moves into the neighborhood, and actually scales. We see the repeating pattern in Jesus's life of retreat. He's constantly helping people to connect with the Father. He models it, he teaches about it, he trains in it, he encourages other people in it. So what we're looking for in this context, as we think about fractals, and this is what's significant for a microchurch leader or a missional community leader, is understanding your values. So your values might be prayer, they might be generosity, and they might be community or sacrificial love or whatever those values are. And what you're looking for in the fractal pattern is to say, how does prayer happen at every size? How does the fractal of prayer repeat from the smallest unit all the way to the biggest unit? So we don't just do big prayer meetings as a micro church. We don't just have every single individual with their prayer life, but we maybe pray in 2s and 3s, and we are praying for different needs and different people. We're praying in our smaller family units or extended family units. We're gathering with a few people in the micro church to be able to go and pray for this or listen for this. It's prophetic, it's intercessory, whatever it is. So prayer happens all the way through the system. It's not outsourced to a person. It's not outsourced to an individual. So we're looking for scale is the first piece that I would encourage you to think about when we think about fractals. So what does it look like for you to take your vision, your values, your ideas, and actually make it happen from the smallest to the largest unit? So it goes to scale, it repeats, and then it scales. And the second piece, if this is repeats and scale, the second piece is that it embodies. Too many leaders just think concepts and talk without actually walking the walk. It's in our head rather than our hands and our feet. So these ideas that can be up here need to be made real. And so there's a couple of different ways that I might describe that. So one of the ways is a core principle becomes a contextualized practice. So it's not just prayer as an amorphous idea up there, but it's a practice of prayer, individual, family, communal, microchurch. Another way is to say we have a strong skeleton. So if you think of your skeleton inside you, that's a system and a structure that supports underneath. It's core, it's strong, it's intentional. So we have our ideas and our values that are intentional and strong. They're ordered and disciplined. And we have skin, which gives us the texture, the feel, the face, the touch. And so the fractal means that the idea becomes flesh and then begins to grow. Your DNA is a simple fractal pattern. It repeats all the way across every element of your body. You don't have just DNA in your head or your leg or your arms. It goes to scale. And so all of these are vital, because often what happens in a leadership context is it's not 20% of the people doing 80% of the work. It's about 5% of the people doing 95% of the work. If we're not careful, what we're trying to do is manage and help and support and push and do all these things. If we can identify our core values and then create fractal patterns so that they embed, they repeat, and they scale, we don't have to chase everyone about prayer or about mission or about generosity or about hospitality. It becomes a repeating pattern. It becomes something that becomes normative and natural and finally instinctive to people. Final thought, and then we're going to pause and dialogue a little bit with Mike. So we're looking at a fractal being an idea that is embodied, it's repeated, and it goes to scale. And so that's the fractal pattern, this small picture, the idea that happens. Why this is important is because the idea, which is up here, becomes incarnational because it becomes real in a person. And then through intentionality, it begins to repeat and scale, and it has impact. Without that process, using a principle of fractals, we will just have ideas, or we will just have solo heroic leaders. And ideas don't change the world, and solo heroic leaders don't change the world. So the way that you can utilize this principle of fractals and you get past the language is this. Identify your core principles. So if we think of Creo Collective and Mike, or we think of one of his micro churches, you'd say these are our core beliefs, our core values, our core principles. You can name what they are. And then it is, how do they become contextual practices? What does that look like? For them to be embodied, for them to be repeated, and then for them to go to scale. So we begin to have a plan where we invite people into the process. And the way that you can utilize the fractal pattern effectively is helping people to understand what you're trying to do. So final thought from me, and then we're going to pause and Mike's going to ask a couple of questions and we're going to leave it open. There's lots of space to be able to process. When you're thinking about naming your core principles, I would think about a picture, a phrase, and a practice. So these core principles, you may use the term core values, you may use the term core principles, you may use the term core belief, but they are what you fight for, what you stand for, what you embody, who you are. They are sort of what makes you, you, they're your DNA. And being able to communicate visually, verbally, and then incarnationally, or experientially is another way you can say it, is vital. So it really pulls people in with a picture, so they're able to see something. That's the idea. I can get it, I can put it into practice, and then it will scale. A phrase, just a simple phrase that delivers the code, pulls them in, they can live it, or a practice. This is how we're going to live these values. So in one sense, fractals aren't an end in themselves. They're a means to the end of sustainability and scalability. So don't think about, I need to do fractals. They merely help ideas have flesh on and then multiply. It's the way, and a way of describing how ideas can first be embodied, then repeated, and then scaled. Mike, we've been in this conversation a lot. What's your thought, and what would you want to highlight?
Yeah, I think real tangible there, as you talked about the image. One of Creo's values is hosting parties and having fun. And you think about Jesus as the Son of Man came eating and drinking.
Yes.
And so you have this image of a shared table, and then you go, all right, what that means for us is that we're going to share our tables with people like Jesus did. And so tangibly, every week, every month, we've got a community of people that are sharing tables, hosting parties, having fun. And so you have it kind of scaling out that way. And then the way that it plays out like you described, is contextual. It might be Christian doing paella in the ground, playing soccer at the local park. It might be a couple guys grabbing happy hour after work. It's going to be completely contextual, but it's scalable, reproducible, multiplicative, and the DNA is in the smallest piece, which I think is really critical. So let me ask you this question. If you think about nature and God's design, what are some of your favorite examples? As you say, this isn't just strategic, but I think it's the way that God works. It's DNA. It's in all of creation. What are some of your favorite images or examples of fractal in the design of God in the world?
Yeah, my favorite image is the one, and it's 8:30 p.m. for me, so I can't see it because it's dark, but just outside my window we've got a tree line, beautiful trees, and when they're full of leaves they're beautiful, but when the leaves go, just seeing the trunk, first branch, second branch, third branch, and this sort of beautiful picture similar to the black and white one I shared, but less of a plant, more of a tree. I just think it's a beautiful picture where you can see this sort of strong core, and you know that the picture's actually mirrored and repeated in the root system. So we can't see that, but the root system goes from the core all the way out. So there's this beautiful picture. So trees are one. As I look there, I live by the sea. So there's the repeating pattern of the tide. I'll just stand, and there's something mesmerizing of the sort of in and out of the sea. It's just a beautiful picture. And then also, which is a slightly different context, is seeing some of there's lots of good and lots of bad in my parenting. It's not all good in any way, shape or form, but actually seeing some of the recurring patterns happen in our kids who are picking up some of the values. So that's obviously in nature, in humanity, there's this sort of mirroring process that comes as you go through. So I look at how apprenticeship happens through practices and proximity. I think of nature, trees, leaves, tide. There's so much actually that's natural and organic. And to be really honest, it challenges me because fractals are organic, but we've often made leadership organizational. We've made leadership far more like a factory than a farm. It's more a sort of conveyor belt and systems and engineer. So we kind of engineer rather than farmer. And actually, if we came back to you sow, you turn the soil over, you water, you wait, there's natural seasons. Sort of nowadays in the supermarket, you can get any fruit, any time of the year, chocked full of chemicals. Whereas actually the more natural state is there's a season of fallow, there's a season of planting, there's a season of harvesting, there's seasons. So there's a natural flow to nature that actually we've lost. And it's no mistake, Jesus was in an agrarian culture. He spoke lots of parables and used lots of metaphor around seed and yeast, and the list goes on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's super helpful. So then I think about, ecclesial minimum and the idea of organic systems that are simple, reproducible, transferable, and some of the talk that we've had around stuff like we use different words, but we're saying some of the same stuff: up, in, and out, centered on Jesus, sent by Jesus, living as a family, worship, community, mission.
Yep.
These basic DNA things that you go, okay, well, we're going to have worship, but in one context, it might be music.
Yep.
But in another context, at like a bar church, you're probably not going to slap out a guitar and start playing tunes and be obnoxious, but you could break bread and confess your sins and have communion around the table and experience a time of worship. So you have those core kind of DNA pieces of worship, but they contextualize depending on where you're at, who you're with, what that expression of community looks like. Am I right on that?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, Mike, the two biggest mistakes we all make, I make them, you make them, we all make them, is either what we're trying to do is not contextualized or it's not repeatable. So either we're doing something that's not repeatable, it takes so much energy and effort. We need $100,000 and 75 people to plant a church. That is not a sustainable, scalable model. Or it's we do worship like this. As you said, we have a guitar, we have music, we have lights. And so whether we've got 2 people or 2,000 people, we do it the same way. So the fractal pattern isn't about repeating the same vehicle or strategy. It's actually the same idea that's repeated. And that idea, that principle can look very different. So like you said, worship, the principle repeating with 1 person, 10 people, 100 people is very different. Worship with 100 versus worship with 1 is different. But you're absolutely right, Mike. Worship in urban versus rural, in an affluent area, or on a college campus, or in a front room, the context is very different and the quantity is very different. So the repeating pattern isn't a vehicle, a strategy, an effort. It's an idea that has flesh at the different size or in the different context. So it's a real challenge for us. We always default to plug and play. I blame Amazon. So I click, I collect, it's there by the end of the day. And we sort of think church and leadership and community is like click and collect, or we find somebody else's answer and we try and solve our problem with their answer. So this isn't about reproducing a sort of a vehicle or a structure. It's about reproducing ideas or core principles in different contexts, repeating them, that they go to scale.
Yeah, so it's probably helpful to think in terms of, all right, worship community mission is totally scalable, multiplicative, DNA, fractal, but the idea of a huge worship service with extremely gifted and talented musical, people
Is not.
and an incredibly dynamic speaker in a building that's really state of the art is not easy to multiply, right?
Nope.
And so we got to ask the question of what are we doing that's actually blocking multiplication? And not to say that God can't use that, but if we're thinking in terms of multiplication, what is actually, easily reproducible?
Yeah. Well, we want to plant, we don't just want to plant a micro church. We want to plant a micro churching, church planting micro church. So you plant pregnant and the end in mind is multiplication. It's not a 1 generation we plant and we finish. We plant something that plants something that plants something. We're not trying to just be a disciple or be a disciple that makes 1 disciple. We're trying to make disciples who make disciples who make disciples who make disciples. So we're definitely starting with the end in mind of that 3rd, 4th, 5th generation. And you're right, if we take an answer for 1 context and try and enforce it onto another context, we never win. We always lose. So I think for me, the challenge that fractals give us is, where am I doing it in my own strength, or where am I using somebody else's answer, or where is it, as you say, unsustainable or unscale and not able to scale because of the model or the practice or the vehicle that we've got.
So if someone happens to be on this call or watching it later and they're going, I've never thought in terms of fractals, where do I even begin identifying some of these key pieces? What does it look like for me to start to think in terms of fractal multiplication DNA? What are maybe a couple key things that you'd say to them, Rick?
Yeah, I would just stick my whiteboard up. The first thing I would do is to say, what are my core values or my core principles? So if vision is where are we going, vision is a picture of a preferred tomorrow or 10 years, 5 years, that's your kingdom come, your will be done. So if vision is your future and where you're going, your values are who you are on the journey. Your values shape your actions and your interactions. So these are the sort of corner flags of the pitch. These are really culture, are embodied, a set of embodied values. So your values are what you value. They shape and frame your actions and interactions. So this is who you are. It's your DNA is another way of saying it. So the first thing I would do, Mike, is actually do some self-reflection and say, what are my 3 to 5 core values? What do I stand for? So it might be as simple as worship, community, mission, follow the ACTS model. It may be something slightly different, but you can't really embrace fractal patterns to try and repeat and scale or embody until you actually know what the idea is that you're wanting to recreate across the whole. So the first thing I would do is to understand those core values. The second would be to actually think about, what does it look like for me to embody them? So what does it look like for me to live out prayer, to live out community, and to live out mission? How do I create something as a pattern in my life that begins to make that actually real? And the little way that and why I say this is important is I talk about, we move from discipline to habit to lifestyle. So discipline is intentionally doing the right thing. I'm intentionally wanting to embody this idea. Habit is usually, not just it's effort, it's discipline, but actually usually I'm remembering to pray and I'm putting time in. And finally, it becomes natural. So I intentionally seek to pray and put my time in and reminders. I'm then usually praying, and then it becomes natural, it becomes second nature. So the first thing to do, Mike, is once you've named your core values, is actually work out how they become real in you. Forget anyone else but you. So that's your sort of one little thing. Then you're looking to think, how does it repeat? So how does one person become 3 to 5 to 10 people? And how does it become something that is regular? So it repeats in terms of people and in terms of time and effort. So it repeats in the life of others and it repeats regularly in your life. So you don't just do it once, you do it many times, and it becomes something that actually a core group of you begin to do regularly. And then finally, scale. Whatever context you're in, Mike, whether you're a small group leader, a micro church leader, think about the biggest space that you've got so far, and basically then say, how does everyone do it all the time? And I don't mean literally they do it all the time, every moment, but it becomes part of their natural lifestyle. So if it was prayer, you might say, as an example, I'm going to create a pattern and practice of 15 minutes of prayer every day. And not only am I going to pray for 15 minutes every day, but I'm going to invite 3 to 8 people to pray with me or to pray on their own for 5 to 15 minutes a day. And so I'm going to hold that, they're going to hold that, we're beginning to do that. And then in our micro church, we've got me as an individual, we've got our 3 to 5, we've got a couple of subsets of the micro church. We're all going to do it, and we're going to do it individually and communally on a regular basis. And so prayer begins to do it. And so you're not chasing your micro church to try and organize a big prayer meeting. It's actually something that becomes a natural lifestyle rather than an event you organize. So what we're looking for in scale is not just quantity of we got loads of people to do one event. We're actually looking for integrity, which is this is a normal part of our life. So we're not looking for quantity. We organized a big event. We're looking for integrity, which is this is a normal part of our lifestyle. So that's the kind of process I would do, Mike, and we help people to do, to be able to sort of say, if I want to have this idea happen in the big, it has to happen in a smallish unit and then start small. If you think of Jesus spent time with the 1, identified the 3, the 12, the 72, and then the crowd. He didn't start with the crowd. He modeled it, called a core team, apprenticed them, made it normative, they passed it on, and you can kind of see through the Gospels, through Acts, and then into the epistles and beyond, there's this scale process of these key fractal patterns of core ideas in the life of Jesus. So that's where I'd start, Mike.
Yeah, and I love the word there about incarnation and embodiment, and that we can't really pass this stuff on. You can't really pass the DNA on unless you share your life with a few people. They got to see it on multiple levels and multiple spaces, see this stuff lived out, and then you send them out to do the same. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us. Rich, if you want to end the recording, we'll open it up for